Most people assume military prep schools are all order and structure, but they never talk about what happens when power gets handed to boys who know how to weaponize a chain of command. My name is Elijah Graham. I'm 17. I've been a cadet at Greenhurst Military Academy for the past 2 years. And for most of that time, I kept my head down, followed the rules, and tried not to draw attention, until I became a target. The first time Cadet Major Stanton accidentally slammed my head into a locker during morning drills, I chalked it up to tension. The second time, when he made me do push-ups until my elbows bled, I told myself I just needed to get tougher. But by the third week of the same routine, plus late-night shakedowns, group punishments, ice-cold showers, corrective strikes, I stopped pretending it was anything but abuse. And last Thursday, I finally reported it. Captain Belmore sat in her office like she always did, tidy, unreadable, and 10 minutes behind schedule. She wore her therapy uniform like it itched, all sharp creases and sharper smiles. I need to report something, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It's about Cadet Major Stanton and some of the upperclassmen. Her eyes flicked up, pen hovering above her clipboard. They've been hazing the new cadets. Physically, constantly, especially me. She stared at me for a second, blinked once. Then she made a small mark on the paper and leaned back in her chair. Elijah, she said, with the kind of tone adults use right before they decide they're not going to believe you. You've had trouble adjusting before, haven't you? Adjusting? I frowned. You mean last year? When I had one academic warning because I missed a math quiz during a medical exam. And the dorm infraction. You threw a chair, if I recall. I opened my mouth, then shut it. That had been during a sensory overload. Too much noise, too many people yelling. I'd explained it 100 times. And every time, it was like explaining it to a wall. This isn't about that, I said. Stanton and his crew have been beating on kids. This is serious. She tilted her head like she was trying to figure out if I was pretending or delusional. Then she reached into the drawer and pulled out a little trifold pamphlet. Emotional Resilience Under Pressure. It read in bold red letters. I want you to read this, she said. It might help you regulate some of these reactions. I stared at the glossy paper like it might bite me. I'm not reacting. I'm reporting. Elijah, she said, almost kindly. Accusations like this can be damaging, especially when they're based on perception. You need to think about the consequences. I already did, I said, jaw clenched. My father is the commandant. You really think I'd lie? She smiled then, like I'd said something funny. That won't help you here. We don't do favoritism. And even if we did, she let her voice trail off, gave me a once-over. That wouldn't apply to someone as unstable as you. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to let her see that. You're not going to report it. She said nothing. Right, I muttered. Thanks for your help. As I left her office, I could hear her door shut softly behind me, like a judge closing a case that never had a chance. I didn't go back to class after that. I sat under the bleachers behind the field house, letting the wind hit my face until my skin went numb. I thought about every shove, every punch, every humiliation. I thought about how they always picked moments no one else would see. Or worse, how other cadets just kept their heads down. And I realized something cold and clear. If even the staff refused to listen, if my own father's name didn't matter, then I had only one option left. I needed proof. I needed them caught in the act. Because no one protects a cadet like me. Not until it's too late. After my meeting with Captain Belmore, something in me snapped into place. I wasn't scared anymore. Or maybe I was, but it didn't matter. Fear wasn't going to save me. Proof would. That night, after taps, I lay in my bunk, still as stone, while my mind ticked through possibilities. Nobody believed me. Not Belmore. Not the cadets who walked past as I got shoved into walls, or had my food dumped on the floor. Not even my father, though I hadn't given him a chance yet. I needed them to see what I saw. Every bruise. Every command shouted like a threat. Every whispered warning from cadets too afraid to speak up. I needed it on camera, so I made a plan. I ordered a set of micro body cams from a tactical gear site. Ones disguised as brass buttons, built for field surveillance. Expensive, but I'd been hoarding allowance and summer pay for years. I spent a night sewing the first into my cadet blouse, syncing the feed to an encrypted app on my phone. Then I waited. The next week, I started drifting off on purpose. I'd leave breakfast 5 minutes early or linger at the water cooler until the hallway cleared. I'd volunteer for odd jobs that put me in isolated spots. Sometimes I just walked slower on the way to class. They noticed. By the third day, Cadet Blake, one of Stanton's inner circle, cornered me outside the latrine and smashed my head against the tiled wall hard enough to split my lip. I stayed down and didn't fight back. When he stepped away, I checked the button cam feed, crystal clear. Over the next 2 weeks, the assaults got bolder. They jumped me in the showers, yanked my towel off, shoved me into the tile. They made me sprint laps until I puked, then made me scrub it with a toothbrush. Once, Stanton kneed me in the stomach during a fake combat drill, while his sister, Cadet Medic Kendra Stanton, pinned my arms behind my back like it was part of the exercise. Discipline builds muscle, she muttered, not even meeting my eyes. Every moment was filmed, every name muttered, every laugh caught on tape. I synced everything to a hidden hard drive I kept behind a loose ceiling tile in the rec room. I organized the files by date, time, location. I even made a spreadsheet. Most days, I barely slept. I walked sore. I started flinching when people passed me in the halls. But I kept baiting them, kept logging it, because I was building a case. I caught screenshots of cadet group chats, messages I wasn't meant to see, where they talked about corrections, disciplinary lessons, shutting that whiny freak up. And every time they laid a hand on me, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I counted seconds in my head and prayed the footage would hold. The worst was a Friday night in the field locker room. Two of them held me down while Stanton slapped me across the face again and again, pausing between each hit just long enough to say, "Still think your daddy's gonna save you?" I bled from the mouth that night, but I smiled, because I'd gotten it all. By the fourth week, I had 9 hours of footage, 10 separate assaults, 4 locations, 2 instances with medics involved, 6 ignored bystanders, no shortage of faces. I sat on my bunk one night, staring at the folders, heart pounding. This was it. This was the kind of proof they couldn't ignore. I woke up certain today was the day it would end. For weeks I had been dragging myself out of bed to walk straight into ambushes. I'd eaten lunch with a black eye, hidden bruises under compression sleeves, filmed with shaking hands. But now, finally, I had the truth on tape. 9 hours of it. A complete archive of cruelty. And I had one person left who might still do something about it. My father. I didn't sleep well the night before, but I was up early, uniform pressed, tie straight, footage files organized on a drive tucked in my sock. I planned to wait until after breakfast and catch him in his office. Somewhere private. Somewhere I could plug in the flash drive, hit play, and finally say, "See? You have to see this." But when I walked into the mess hall, I found him already sitting at our usual table, surrounded by steam from a fresh stack of pancakes. He was smiling. "Morning, Cadet," he said, tapping the spot across from him. I sat down, trying not to show the shake in my hands. "Hey, your mother says we need a trip. Just you and me. Some fresh air. Somewhere with mountains." I blinked. "Mountains? MHM," he said, taking a bite. "Colorado. Maybe Oregon. I put in my retirement paperwork 2 weeks ago. Official as of next Monday." I stared at him. "Wait, you're retiring? Now?" He sipped his coffee, nodding. "It's time. 29 years in. They're transferring me out for the final stretch. We'll leave this place behind. New orders, new start." The blood drained from my face. "Dad," I started, trying to get the words out. "I need to talk to you about something important." He smiled again. That warm, easy kind of smile that always made me feel safe growing up. But now, it felt like the floor underneath me was disappearing. "I know what you're going to say," he said. "I've noticed how tired you look. It's been a hard year. I get it. But after the move, it'll be better. I'll have more time for us. You'll have a clean slate." He meant well. I knew that. But what he didn't know, what he was too busy planning pancakes and hiking trips to see, was that he was my last shot. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to nod. "Yeah," I said. "A clean slate." Inside, I was screaming. Because the only man with real authority to expose what I'd recorded was about to walk out the door forever. And if I wanted justice, I'd have to find another way. 3 days after my father dropped the retirement bomb, I was coming out of the infirmary with a taped rib and a busted lip when I heard Stanton's voice drifting through the stairwell. He was laughing, loud, obnoxious, and I froze behind the wall near the landing, just out of sight. "Council seats basically guaranteed," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete. "They're doing the formal showcase at the chapel Friday. Whole oversight board. Cameras, donors, big speeches. Mom's gonna make it look like she invented cadet welfare." Someone chuckled. "That's rich. She's been running her mouth about reform for months. Says the academy's turning a corner. Clean, fair, transparent." He made a mockingly serious voice at that part. "Meanwhile, we're still running the place exactly how we want. Just gotta keep the sheep quiet a little longer." I heard a third voice, probably Blake, ask, "You think that Graham freak's gonna keep quiet?" Stanton laughed again. "Doesn't matter. No one believes him. His dad's basically out the door, and Belmore's already flagged him as unstable. If he wants to embarrass himself, let him." They headed upstairs, their footsteps fading. I stood there, leaning against the cool wall, letting the sting of my split lips settle into something else. Determination. They played the long game. Now it was my turn to go all in. That night, I studied the security map in the admin server I'd snuck into last semester during a systems class. One hallway, just outside the library annex, had a fully functional overhead camera with a wide view and no known blind spots. It was a tight space, long, echoey, nowhere to hide. Perfect. I just had to get jumped there. The next 2 days, I made myself available. I walked slower between periods, lingered outside the annex before lights out. I made sure the right people saw me walking that route alone at the right time. I even left my jacket accidentally behind to go back for it after final formation. Friday came fast. The event banners were already up. They'd waxed the floors and stacked programs in chapel pews. All the brass would be in one room. Parents, officials, even reporters. It had to be today. At exactly 1900 hours, I turned the corner into the hallway, button cams rolling. I didn't hear them coming. I felt it, a slam into the lockers, then a fist to the stomach that knocked the air out of me. You still think you're above the rules, Graham? Stanton hissed. Another blow. Then boots to my legs, my back. I curled instinctively, one eye angled up, just enough to see the red light blinking on the overhead security camera. Kendra's voice, cold, detached, snapped through the hallway. Just hold him still. It'll be over fast. When it finally ended, I couldn't stand right away. I had to drag myself up the wall, ribs screaming, knees wobbling. But I grinned through the blood. They gave me everything I needed. And tomorrow, I was going to give it right back, in front of their mothers, their donors, their legacy. The chapel had never been this packed. Brass uniforms lined the pews, metal shining under the stained glass. Parents in suits, donors with clipboards, journalists whispering as the camera crews adjusted their angles. At the front, a podium stood polished and proud, emblazoned with the Academy's crest, flanked by 2 enormous flags. And behind it stood her, Dr. Marla Stanton, candidate for the Academy Oversight Council, keynote speaker, mother of the cadet who broke my ribs less than 24 hours ago. I stood at the back of the chapel, shoulders stiff, face swollen. My lip was still split. My eye was going purple. I had wiped the dried blood from my nose. But the damage was undeniable. I made sure of that. Dr. Stanton's voice rang out, warm and theatrical. "We are building the future here," she declared, her hand resting gently on the podium. "Our cadets are not just students. They are tomorrow's leaders. And we, the adults entrusted with their care, must ensure they are safe, supported, and shaped into people of integrity." I waited. The screen behind her came to life, cycling through glossy photos of cadets shaking hands, running drills, smiling over meals. The crowd applauded. She basked in it. Then I stepped forward. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just walked, straight down the center aisle, every step echoing. Some people noticed right away. The bruises, the limp, the blood still crusted around my collar. Others turned slowly, confusion settling over the crowd like fog. Dr. Stanton paused mid-sentence. "Cadet, is there something? I need to speak," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's important." The commandant, my father, stood up from his seat near the front, a deep crease forming between his brows. "Elijah," he said quietly, "not now." But I kept going. "I was attacked yesterday," I said, "by Cadet Major Stanton, in that hallway right there." I pointed toward the east wing. His sister, Cadet Medic Stanton, helped hold me down while he beat me. Murmurs broke out. Chairs shifted. I pulled a remote from my blazer pocket and clicked. The projector behind Dr. Stanton flickered, and then it played. The security footage began with a timestamp, 1859 hours. It showed me turning the corner into the hallway. Then Stanton's crew coming fast, fists flying, Kendra gripping my wrists, my body slumping. The audio came next. Stanton's voice, unmistakable. "Still think you're above the rules, Graham?" Gasps filled the chapel. Someone stood up. Someone else said, "Oh my God." I turned around to face them all. "This is what's happening to cadets under your care," I said. "This is what happens when you ignore reports. When you silence kids like me." The doors at the side of the chapel burst open. Stanton himself stood there, chest heaving, face red. Kendra right behind him, eyes darting. "Turn it off," he shouted. "That's not real. It's doctored." Too late. The whole room had seen it, and no one was turning it off. I looked at my father. He was still standing, but now he wasn't frowning. He was staring at the screen like it had just stolen the air from his lungs. I turned back toward Stanton. "This is your legacy," I said. "Both of you." And I let the silence take it from there. The chapel cleared in stunned waves. First it was the donors, then the board members, then the cadets, moving stiffly under the weight of what they'd just witnessed. I stood at the edge of the altar as the screen faded to black behind me, the last frame frozen on Stanton's boot raised mid-kick. The silence didn't last. My father stepped forward, face unreadable. He didn't yell. He didn't scold me. He just turned to the nearest officer and said, "Secure the cadets involved. Escort them to holding." Stanton exploded. "You can't do this. You're not even staying. You're done here." My father didn't flinch. "Not yet, Cadet Major." Security moved in. Stanton thrashed, screaming about doctored footage, about lies, about lawsuits. Kendra tried to pull rank, claiming medical authority. It didn't work. They were both escorted out through a side exit as half the room watched in horror, and the other half in grim satisfaction. It wasn't over. The fallout started immediately. By the end of the day, a military news crew had arrived, tipped off by someone in the press pool. They got the story fast. Footage, names, reactions from guests still milling around in shock. One reporter asked to interview me on the chapel steps. I said no. I didn't need to talk. The video had done that for me. But others started talking. Cadets I barely knew pulled me aside, eyes wide, voices shaking. Some had bruises of their own. Others had stories from years past. Beatings, threats, training accidents that weren't accidents. One sophomore handed me a thumb drive and said, "I recorded a group chat months ago. I didn't know what to do with it until now." By that evening, a full internal investigation was opened. It was more than just Stanton. It was a pattern, one that ran deep. Captain Belmore was summoned to the administrative wing after a leaked email showed she had received multiple reports of abuse and failed to log a single one. My name appeared on 2 of those emails, both from junior instructors who had quietly raised concerns and been ignored. Her excuse? Cadet Graham has a history of emotional instability. But the timestamps on the emails and her typed replies told another story. She had actively advised instructors not to pursue disciplinary action without concrete proof, knowing full well that any cadet who tried to obtain proof would be punished for it. By midnight, she was relieved of duty pending inquiry. Stanton's mother, Dr. Marla Stanton, made a final desperate play. She called her husband, a high-profile JAG attorney, who showed up the next morning with folders, threats, and a defamation of character statement he tried to force onto my father's desk. My father didn't sign it. Instead, he pushed it right back. "Your son assaulted a cadet on federal property," he said. "Your daughter restrained him during the act. And you, Dr. Stanton, gave a public speech about protecting students while that same student was recovering from broken ribs." Dr. Stanton tried to argue it was all a smear campaign, that the footage had been edited, that I had set them up. She was half right. I had. The investigation expanded fast. The Oversight Council postponed her nomination indefinitely. A formal ethics complaint was filed by 2 board members. And the military news crew? They stayed. They ran the footage on the evening broadcast with the headline, "Cadet Speaks, System Shakes." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, because for the first time in years, I wasn't. They came in plain uniforms and quiet shoes. 3 federal investigators, 2 JAG officers, and 1 congresswoman's aide, just 48 hours after the chapel. They didn't smile. They didn't knock. They moved like they already knew what they were going to find. I wasn't there for the start of the sweep, but word spread fast. The investigators requested full access to academy systems, disciplinary records, complaint files, security footage, internal messaging servers. One officer asked for student health logs going back 5 years. Another asked for a chair and started interviewing cadets, one by one. And suddenly, silence wasn't safe anymore. That afternoon, my father called me into his office. His retirement plaque was still sitting on the edge of the desk, but he hadn't touched it since the day of the chapel. His face was tight, but his voice was steady. "They want your medical records," he said, "to document everything. Injuries, incident reports, every time you went to the infirmary." I nodded slowly. "Okay." He looked at me, longer than usual. "They're also asking if you'll testify before the Congressional Review Panel. It's moving forward. What happens if I say yes?" He exhaled. "You'll be seen, and so will everything they did." I didn't hesitate. Then yes. By the next morning, the academy was a crime scene in everything but name. Investigators uncovered documentation of behavioral flagging, a process where neurodivergent cadets were quietly labeled as sensitive or unstable to invalidate future complaints. I was on that list. So were 8 others. They found incident logs edited after the fact, emails marked private, with attachments mysteriously deleted, and a string of messages between academy brass and high-profile parents, including Stanton's father, showing requests for leniency, discretion, and quiet handling. The quiet was over. Charges were filed fast. Stanton, aggravated assault, conspiracy to intimidate, conduct unbecoming a cadet leader. Kendra, aiding and abetting, falsifying medical reports. Belmore, negligence of duty, willful obstruction, destruction of evidence. Even Stanton's father wasn't spared, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation. My own medical results became evidence. I had 3 healing ribs, deep tissue bruising, and stress markers consistent with prolonged trauma. My mom flew in the moment she was notified. She didn't say a word when she saw me, just put her hand over her mouth and cried. They let her sit in on the documentation process. As a trauma nurse, She knew exactly what the records meant. She never asked why I hadn't told her sooner. She already knew. The military broadcast station picked up the story next. Not just a cadet standing up to abuse, but a system cracked wide open. Congressional subpoenas followed. Committee chairs called it a gross failure of oversight and protection. One senator called for a full reform bill to address disability protections in military academies. Another asked if I'd be willing to appear via live stream and explain how I captured the evidence. I said yes, again. And as all this happened, while the news anchors analyzed the scandal and lawyers prepared their cases, my father walked into the superintendent's office and told them he wasn't leaving. Not yet. I built this place, he said. I'll help fix it before I go. They agreed. He revoked Belmore's access, replaced her with a combat psychologist trained in adolescent PTSD. He suspended instructors who ignored complaints, restructured cadet reporting chains, and ordered external reviews for every ongoing disciplinary file. For once, silence wasn't the default. People were talking, people were listening, and I wasn't alone anymore. The first night after the congressional committee named me publicly, my dorm room door was scratched up with a key. The words snitch and freak were carved across the bottom panel. I didn't report it. There was already a security detail posted outside my building by then. By the end of the week, I was pulled from on-campus classes and transitioned to remote instruction from an undisclosed location. The threats came in slow waves: anonymous messages, voicemail pranks, fake social accounts using my face. One even sent a screenshot of my mother's workplace. I forwarded it all to the investigators and went offline. I wasn't scared. I was just tired. But I wasn't alone. Disability rights organizations reached out. One firm offered full legal representation pro bono. The National Cadet Welfare Coalition released a statement calling me a critical figure in military school reform. I got letters, actual handwritten letters, from other cadets across the country, most from kids I'd never met. Some just said thank you. Others shared stories they had never told anyone before. Then came the film crew. It started with a journalist who had covered the chapel incident. She reached out gently, like she expected me to say no. But she asked the right questions, not about drama, but about systems, about survival, about what needed to change. I agreed to let them film, but only if they focused on more than just me. The crew followed my remote school sessions, my interviews with lawyers, and my meetings with advocacy groups. They filmed the broken ceiling tile where I'd hidden the footage drive, now removed and cataloged as evidence. They filmed the hallway where Stanton broke my ribs, and the chapel where I played the proof. They filmed my mom, too, watching the footage again with tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The documentary didn't have a name yet, but the working title was Cadet No More. Meanwhile, the criminal cases moved forward. Stanton was officially charged with aggravated assault, conspiracy, and hate crime enhancements. The last charge caught the most attention, due to the evidence from group chats showing him targeting cadets based on neurodivergence and background. His sister was expelled after the footage showed her pinning me down during multiple attacks. Her medical license, pending military approval, was suspended indefinitely. Their parents, once regular fixtures at every academy function, were now under investigation. Stanton's mother was dropped from the Oversight Council nomination. Stanton's father was suspended from practice, pending an ethics board review. Some in the media tried to paint me as a disruptive cadet with a history of behavioral issues. But the narrative didn't stick, because by now, too many people had seen the truth. And the truth was louder than all the whispers. I stayed off social media. I barely checked the news. I focused on the next step and the one after that. Each meeting, each deposition, each recorded message to the congressional investigators was another brick in a wall that couldn't be ignored anymore. For the first time in my life, my neurodivergence wasn't something to hide. It was the reason I saw what they didn't want anyone to notice. And now, everyone else was finally seeing it, too. It started with lawsuits. First came the parents of a sophomore cadet who'd withdrawn 2 years ago. Same bruises, same threats, same silence. Then 2 more families filed suit against the academy, citing willful negligence and failure to protect. The institution was buried in legal paperwork within a month. Leadership crumbled quickly after that, for senior faculty members either resigned or were suspended. The academy chaplain, who had seen my injuries a dozen times without asking questions, stepped down with a vague statement about reflection and prayer. The dean of cadet affairs was escorted out by security when investigators found archived emails warning him not to disrupt high-potential families. By the time I testified before Congress, I was used to the cameras. It was live-streamed from a private location. I wore a plain blue button-up and spoke directly into the webcam. No script, no PR coaching, just me, my voice, and the weight of everything that had happened. "I'm not here because I'm brave," I said. "I'm here because I ran out of ways to stay quiet." I explained how neurodivergent cadets were flagged and discredited, how reporting systems were built to fail, how favoritism turned into policy, and policy turned into protection for the worst offenders. I told them what Stanton said during one of the beatings: "No one's ever going to believe the weird kid." And for a long time, he'd been right. The subcommittee listened without interruption. Some nodded. One woman wiped her eyes. I ended by holding up the button cam I'd used to record the assaults. This is what saved me. Not the rules, not the system. A button I had to sew into my own uniform. A few weeks later, I watched Stanton's trial from a secure live stream. He sat in full dress uniform at the defendant's table, face pale, shoulders square like he still thought it was a drill formation. He didn't speak much, but the evidence did. The group chats were brutal. One thread joked about neuro cleanup. Another talked about de-escalation drills that were just excuses for forced physical discipline. There were references to my father, my mother, and how no commandant would risk rocking the boat for a broken toy. They introduced my injuries, the hallway footage, the messages, and even character statements from other cadets who finally spoke up. Some testified under oath. Others sent written affidavits. The jury took 3 hours to decide. Guilty on all counts. Stanton was sentenced to a juvenile military detention facility with adult transfer at age 18. The judge was clear. The hate crime enhancement was upheld, and rehabilitation would not erase intent. Kendra Stanton's case was handled separately. She accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to avoid further charges. She lost her medical credentials and was expelled with dishonor. Their parents faced their own reckoning. Stanton's mother resigned from all public positions, and the Oversight Council opened a full ethics inquiry into her nomination process. Stanton's father was suspended indefinitely from practicing military law. His name would be scrubbed from several closed-door policy initiatives he'd once authored. And me? I started getting offers, full-ride scholarships, programs that highlighted inclusive leadership and neurodiversity in public service. Ivy League schools, military academies, civilian colleges with adaptive learning tracks. Each one made a point to say, "You belong here." I hadn't expected that. I didn't know what I would choose yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, I'd walk into it without flinching, because I wasn't the broken toy anymore. I was the one who rewrote the rules. The sky above the parade field looked the same as it had the day I arrived. Wide, blue, sharp. But everything beneath it had changed. My name is Elijah Graham. I'm 28 years old. I live in D.C. now, and I wear a suit more often than a uniform. But today, I stood back where it all began. The Academy's annual honor convocation had never drawn this kind of crowd before. Reporters, lawmakers, cadets from across the country, all watching from under the big white tent. I stood at the podium, dressed in a dark gray suit and tie, with a folder of handwritten notes I didn't end up using. I looked out and saw my parents in the front row. My mom was crying before I even opened my mouth. My dad looked older than I remembered, but proud, real proud. "I came here 15 years ago," I began. "I was just a kid with a buzz cut and a stack of accommodations no one wanted to read. I was told to toughen up, be quiet, fit in. I tried. For a while." A soft laugh moved through the rows. "I was different," I said. "Still am. But the difference isn't weakness. It's signal in a room full of noise. It's pattern recognition in a system built on denial." I paused, let the words hang. They tried to break that out of me. Instead, I broke their silence. I told them about resilience. Not the kind written in glossy pamphlets, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are when the world calls you wrong. I spoke about the cadets who never got the chance to speak up, and the ones who never came forward because they were too scared or too tired. And then I thanked them, not the academy as it was, but the people who stayed to rebuild it. When I stepped down, the superintendent met me at the base of the stairs and offered his hand. Behind him, near the rotunda, hung a new addition to the honor hall, a framed portrait of me in dress uniform, standing in front of the chapel, my black eye still visible. The plaque underneath read, "Cadet Elijah Graham, for bravery, integrity, and reform." That wasn't all. Captain Belmore was now serving a 3-year sentence for negligence and obstruction. Dr. Marla Stanton had been convicted on federal ethics charges, and her license to practice had been permanently revoked. The new academy therapist was a trauma-informed clinician with a background in neurodivergence and adolescent development. Every cadet now had access to anonymous reporting apps and guaranteed third-party case reviews. And at military training programs across the country, Elijah Graham's story was required viewing. The ethics module that used to be 2 pages of dry policy had turned into a case study. My case study. Video clips, testimony, and outcomes. Officers in training were now taught that silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. After the ceremony, a cadet, probably 14, caught up to me outside the honor hall. He said, "Sir, I'm autistic. I used to think I couldn't make it here." I looked him in the eye. "You can. And if they say otherwise, remind them whose picture hangs inside." He grinned. I watched him run back toward the dorms, past the statue of the academy's founder. And for the first time, I didn't see a building that failed me. I saw one that I helped fix. And that was enough.